I'm a 30-year-old woman named Claire, and for as long as I can remember, my cousin Tessa has treated my life like material for her own amusement. We grew up close, same schools, same family gatherings, same people comparing us. Where I was quiet, she was dramatic. Where I tried to stay out of trouble, she found ways to create it and somehow make it entertaining. When we were teenagers, she learned the power of a rumor. I took a semester off college after a bad breakup. It was supposed to be time to regroup, figure out my next step. Tessa turned it into a story that I'd been in rehab. She told friends, family, even hinted it at church. The story spread faster than anything I could control, and for years that whisper followed me. At a family barbecue one summer, my aunt mentioned it loudly enough that a few neighbors turned their heads. Tessa laughed, pretending it was an inside joke. I remember standing there holding a plate of food, realizing I'd never really get to correct the record without looking defensive. So I worked harder. I finished college, started a marketing firm, built my own clients, and made sure my name stood for competence and professionalism. Then, years later, Tessa came back into my life as if nothing had ever happened. She called one day, said she was looking for her first real job and could use some guidance. I should have ignored the message, but I helped her. I edited her resume, introduced her to a few contacts, even vouched for her once. I told myself it was maturity. She called it family. For a while, things were quiet. She landed a job in community outreach. I'd see her tagged in charity posts and thought maybe she'd changed. Then small comments started again. At a networking mixer, someone mentioned she'd joked that I had a history of breakdowns. Another said she implied I was hard to work with. I brushed it off until one of my long-term clients ended our contract. The reason? Concerns about my emotional reliability. That was when I confronted her in person. I met her for lunch, laid everything out calmly. She smirked and said people believe what they want. That was all. I should have left then, but I tried one last time to get the family involved. My mother begged me to let it go for the sake of peace. My aunt defended Tessa, saying I was overreacting. And Tessa, she just smiled and told everyone I was being sensitive. A week later, she posted an old photo of me fainting at a college party with the caption, "Some people can't handle life." It hit a private forum that several of my clients were part of. I didn't even know until one of them sent me a screenshot asking if I was okay. That single post cost me another contract and several silent withdrawals. I released one professional statement, short, factual, nothing emotional, just clarifying that the incident in question was a medical episode, not what she implied. It didn't stop the whispers, but it stopped me from staying quiet. That night, I sat in front of my computer, scrolling through her old posts, photos, and public mentions. For the first time, I realized I didn't need to defend myself anymore. Tessa had made a career out of other people's mistakes while burying her own. She'd built her reputation on a clean image that wasn't real. I decided I was done being the polite cousin who let her get away with it. Instead of another confrontation, I started collecting screenshots, public records, archived posts, employment histories. Every contradiction she'd ever left behind online. I didn't plan revenge. I planned accountability. Every document I found was already public. I just organized it. Every photo she deleted was still sitting in an old tag somewhere. Every story she told about me had a timeline that could be disproven. When I was done, I had a folder labeled proof. Not to use recklessly, not to humiliate her, just to make sure that when she tried to drag my name again, the truth would speak first. And as it turned out, I didn't even need to lift a finger. All it took was one person, someone we both knew, to stumble on the right piece of that truth. That was the start of everything that followed. The folder I'd built sat on my desktop for weeks before I touched it again. I didn't plan to use it, but when Tessa's gossip started creeping into my work again, I opened it back up. Every screenshot, every record, every tag was time-stamped and traceable. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about making sure that truth didn't get lost under her noise. I began with her college years. Back then, she posted everything online, party photos, bragging captions, and half-deleted rants when people crossed her. A lot had vanished, but old tags never really die. I searched archived versions of her pages and found photos of nights she'd tried to erase, her holding a client folder in one hand and a cocktail in the other during her internship at a local firm. That caught my attention. I remembered the company. With a little digging, I found an old coworker of hers through public LinkedIn posts. He'd once written a vague comment about a confidentiality breach that nearly cost them a contract. The company never named names, but his comment tagged her directly. Screenshots, archived timestamps, and a bit of context built a clear picture. She'd been fired for leaking client material. She'd simply scrubbed it from her resume and moved on. Next, I ran a basic public record search. It's amazing how much shows up when you know where to look. There it was, a small claims court filing for unpaid rent and property damage from an old apartment. The judgment wasn't massive, but it painted a consistent story, carelessness hidden behind confidence. This mattered now more than ever because Tessa had positioned herself as a community outreach manager, the face of local trust and ethics. She'd even announced her intention to run for a community board seat, one that reviewed neighborhood grant budgets and compliance policies. The irony practically wrote itself. Around that time, an old college friend, Maria, called me. She'd been at an event where Tessa told people that I'd lied about my qualifications, and that my degree was barely legitimate. Maria knew better, but wanted me to be aware. I didn't argue. I just went home, opened my office drawer, and gathered every certificate, transcript, and reference letter I'd ever earned. I scanned them all, stored them in the same folder, and renamed it Archive A. That night, I sent Tessa one email. Short, polite, professional. I asked her not to discuss me in any context, personal or professional. No threats, no emotions, just documentation. She never replied. Instead, Maria later told me that Tessa bragged to her friends that I was still jealous. That was fine. I wasn't the one talking. A few days later, I made a simple post on my professional page. Nothing specific, just a short reflection about how accountability builds real trust, while appearances fade. It got a normal amount of engagement from clients and colleagues, but within hours, Tessa posted her own vague message about jealous people who can't stand to see others succeed. Her friends flooded her comments with hearts and encouragement. None of them realized she'd just drawn a line connecting herself to the conversation I never mentioned her in. By the weekend, my aunt called me out of nowhere, accusing me of attacking family online. I told her once that facts weren't attacks, and ended the call. After that, I didn't respond to any of their messages. Silence, I learned, was the sharpest form of response. And silence worked. Tessa's posts grew longer, angrier, and more defensive. Each one exposed a little more about her side of things, who she'd lied to, what she'd covered up. She started sharing motivational quotes about resilience against haters, and in between those, liked comments from people asking about the rumors she'd once spread about me. The more she posted, the less controlled she looked. When her community board nomination became official, the announcement went public on the local government site. She posted a photo with a caption about proving doubters wrong. I did what no one expected. I commented congratulations. It was short, polite, and perfectly professional. People liked the comment, and the narrative shifted. Suddenly, she looked like the one holding a grudge. Behind the scenes, Maria reached out again. She told me she'd independently sent in screenshots and old public documents about Tessa's past violations to the nomination committee. None of it was private, it was all public record, but it told a full story. The board had to take it seriously because integrity was part of the eligibility standard. A week later, the local paper ran a short piece, "Community nominee suspended pending review of professional conduct allegations." It didn't mention names, but the timing made it obvious. Tessa's campaign page went silent overnight. Her work email auto-replied that she was on leave. My aunt called again, crying this time, saying Tessa was devastated and that I'd gone too far. But I hadn't sent anything myself. I didn't need to. Everything that came out was already part of the truth she'd left behind. That week, Tessa deleted her public pages. Her friends stopped tagging her, and for the first time since childhood, there was nothing more for her to say. The woman who once controlled every rumor in the room had been outmatched by her own history, and all I'd done was make sure people could see it clearly. The suspension made local news within a day. It wasn't front-page material, just a short piece about a pending review of a nominee's professional conduct. But people recognized her photo instantly. By the time the article finished circulating through neighborhood group chats, my aunt was calling from one number after another. When I finally picked up, she was in tears, saying Tessa hadn't eaten in 2 days, and that I'd gone too far. I didn't argue. The situation spoke for itself. Tessa had spent years writing my reputation for me. Now the facts were simply correcting the script. The committee launched an internal investigation. Tessa claimed that I had hacked her, insisting that private information had been leaked maliciously. But investigators traced every document back to publicly accessible records and verified that no hacking had occurred. The HR department from her old internship confirmed that she had indeed shared client data and that the termination had been documented internally. That verification was enough to finalize her suspension. Her campaign pages went dark one by one. The slogan she'd been so proud of, trust, transparency, together, vanished overnight. Her staff removed her photos from the community website, and the email link once used for outreach now redirected to a general contact form. It all disappeared quietly, the way things do when an organization wants distance without headlines. My aunt stopped speaking to me after that. She sent one last message saying I'd embarrassed the family. My mother didn't comment publicly but called me privately that night. She didn't congratulate me or badmouth Tessa. She just said she was proud of how I'd handled everything professionally. That was enough. Meanwhile, business picked up again. Clients who had hesitated months earlier reached back out. A few even mentioned they admired how I'd carried myself through the rumors without engaging in drama. My client base doubled by the end of that quarter. The gossip that once hurt me had turned into quiet credibility. Then something unexpected happened. Tessa's old college roommate found my contact information through my company website. She wrote that she'd seen the suspension article and finally felt safe to speak up. Apparently, Tessa had left her with a trail of unpaid bills years ago, including a shared lease that had gone to collections. The roommate thanked me for exposing the truth and said she planned to reopen her small claims case. I gave her the case number I'd found during my research. It was still active in the court database. A week later, the committee issued an official statement saying that Tessa had voluntarily withdrawn her nomination. Everyone knew what that meant. Within a few hours, screenshots of the statement circulated in the same online circles where she'd once flaunted her achievements. The comments started small, people asking what happened, others defending her, but the tide shifted fast. Someone reposted old screenshots of her mocking coworkers, belittling neighbors, and bragging about never facing consequences. It was all public, all verifiable, and the tone of the conversation changed instantly. Her image as the polished community figure crumbled. Those who once praised her posts about personal growth quietly unfollowed or deleted their comments. I didn't join the conversation. I didn't like or share anything. I just focused on my clients, finished my projects, and scheduled new ones. Silence worked once, it worked again. Her downfall didn't need an audience, it needed space. 3 weeks passed before she resurfaced. A short email landed in my inbox. It had no greeting, no signature, just one line, "You'll regret this." I archived it immediately and didn't respond. I saved it with a timestamp and forwarded it to my legal folder, just in case. After that, she tried a new approach. She told mutual acquaintances that she'd been the victim of a smear campaign. Some of them reached out to check what had really happened. I didn't explain, didn't defend, just said there was documentation available if anyone wanted to verify. Most didn't need to. They'd already seen the screenshots floating around. Her old posts started resurfacing faster than she could delete them. The internet never forgets, and her years of gossip had left a long trail. One post showed her joking about burying competitors to get ahead. Another had her mocking a coworker's anxiety. Those same coworkers began commenting under the resurfaced screenshots, confirming what she'd done. Her closest friends, the ones who used to defend her no matter what, began distancing themselves publicly. They untagged her from events, stopped sharing her posts, and some even removed her from group bios. It wasn't a coordinated effort, just quiet self-preservation. By the end of the month, her accounts were private. She deleted her campaign website and took down her professional listings. Her name was still searchable, but every result now led to threads and archived pages documenting her fall. My aunt kept sending messages about forgiveness, but they stopped after a while. Without anyone feeding the story, it faded naturally. I didn't destroy her career. She had done that long before. All I'd done was stop letting her rewrite mine. Business was steady, family gatherings were calmer. The gossip that once made me shrink now worked in my favor because the truth had become the loudest part of the story. Still, I knew Tessa well enough to recognize that silence wasn't surrender. It was her way of regrouping. She'd always believed that charm could erase history. But this time, her history had a paper trail, and it was still unfolding even without me saying a single word. For several weeks, everything was quiet. No more phone calls from my aunt, no posts from Tessa, no whispers from mutual acquaintances. Family dinners returned to normal. My mother started hosting again, and for the first time in years, her name didn't hang in the air like an uninvited guest. I almost believed it was finished. That illusion ended during a downtown luncheon hosted by a major client's firm. It was a networking event filled with familiar faces, sponsors, and introductions. Across the room, I spotted Tessa. She was sitting confidently beside the regional director of a public relations company, one of my client's direct competitors. She looked polished, laughing as if nothing had ever happened. The sight wasn't shocking, but it was calculated. She wanted to be seen. 2 days later, my inbox pinged with a message from one of my clients. The email asked if I had joined forces with Tessa's new firm. Apparently, she'd used our family connection to sound more credible, implying that we were working on collaborative projects. I replied immediately, clarifying that there was no professional association whatsoever, and copied my legal advisor to the thread. I made sure my records were clear, every message archived. The same client followed up privately. During a recent meeting, Tessa had casually mentioned my supposed emotional instability, the exact rumor she'd planted years earlier. Hearing it resurface told me everything. She hadn't learned anything from her suspension. She was just trying to rebuild herself by dragging me into her story again. Instead of reacting publicly, I started gathering information. I reached out to a few trusted colleagues in marketing and PR, people who often cross paths with regional agencies. I asked them to log any mention of my name associated with her firm, good or bad. I wanted verifiable details, not hearsay. If she was using my name for credibility or gossip, I wanted proof before I acted. That weekend, my aunt called again, sounding exhausted. She claimed Tessa had lost her outreach job because of me and that I should let her rebuild. I told her plainly that I wasn't responsible for Tessa's mistakes and ended the call. There was nothing else to say. Days later, one of the colleagues I'd contacted sent me a screenshot of a local industry group chat. Someone mentioned that Tessa had been telling others I'd sabotaged her job applications by spreading false information. That was enough. I decided to handle it directly. I drafted an email to her new firm's HR department. It was calm, factual, and included attached documentation of Tessa's previous professional conduct issues, all verified and publicly recorded. I also included her old post mocking my supposed meltdown at a networking event. It wasn't defamatory. It was evidence of her pattern. The HR department thanked me for providing context and said they'd review the situation carefully. I didn't hear back immediately, but within a week, her name disappeared from their company website and promotional materials. Her profile was erased as if she had never been there. I didn't celebrate or mention it to anyone outside my closest circle. Instead, I archived every email and stored them in a new folder labeled follow-up. Quiet documentation had always worked better than confrontation. A few days later, Maria called. She had mutual contacts within that firm and confirmed what happened. Tessa's dismissal had included a note about breach of confidentiality and reputational risk. It was almost identical to what had happened years ago during her first internship. Once again, her downfall wasn't my doing, it was her own lack of restraint. She simply couldn't stop using other people's reputations as stepping stones. The difference this time was that no one was willing to ignore it anymore. Word spread through professional circles faster than any formal announcement. Industry contacts began referring to her as a risk. A few companies quietly blacklisted her after internal reviews of her work. She had built her career on charm and manipulation, but now her name had become a warning label. Even local event organizers began to notice. At conferences and charity mixers, I overheard people referencing her indirectly, describing someone who couldn't stay out of her own mess. They didn't even need to say her name anymore. Everyone understood. For the first time, I realized I didn't need to do anything more. She was running out of allies and opportunities on her own. Every move she made to recover only revealed more of the same behavior that had caused her downfall. Her lies had momentum now. They didn't need me to expose them. A few weeks later, an invitation arrived in the mail. It was for my mother's surprise birthday dinner. I glanced over the guest list tucked into the envelope, more out of habit than curiosity. Near the bottom, one name stood out, Tessa Carter, +1. I set the invitation down. The calm I'd built suddenly felt fragile. It wasn't anger or fear, just an understanding. She wasn't finished. Family events had always been her stage, and she'd never been one to resist an audience. I RSVP'd anyway. If she wanted a performance, she'd find there was nothing left to act out. But I knew the quiet wasn't going to last much longer. My mother's birthday dinner was at a quiet restaurant downtown, the kind of place that made everyone lower their voices. I arrived a few minutes late and saw my family already seated near the back. Tessa sat at the far end of the table, wearing a bright red dress and a smile that looked rehearsed. The moment she saw me, she waved like we were old friends who hadn't spoken in years for no reason at all. As soon as I took my seat, she stood up slightly, announcing how wonderful it was to see everyone together again. My mother thanked her for coming, and for a while the conversation stayed polite. Tessa kept steering topics towards second chances and family unity, delivering her lines as if she were on stage. When dessert menus came out, she shifted gears. She started talking about integrity in business, and how important transparency is when you work with clients. Her tone was sweet, but every example she gave sounded uncomfortably close to my own experiences. No one said anything until she mentioned people who hide legal problems instead of facing them. Her gaze landed squarely on me. The table went quiet for a few seconds. I didn't flinch or look away. I asked her, clearly, if she was talking about something specific. She smiled and claimed it was just a general point. Conversation moved on, but the performance had already done what she wanted. It left tension hanging in the air. Later that night, as everyone was saying their goodbyes, my cousin's husband, who worked in corporate compliance, pulled me aside. He told me that before dinner started, Tessa had bragged about finding something big that she was going to bring up at the right time. That told me all I needed to know. When I got home, my inbox had an anonymous message waiting. The subject line read, "You can't hide forever." Inside was a scanned document of an old student loan account from over a decade ago, long since paid and closed. There was no message, only the attachment. My lawyer traced the sender's IP address to a residential area 2 streets away from Tessa's neighborhood. It wasn't proof she'd done it herself, but no one else had any reason to dig that deep. I didn't confront her. Instead, I locked down every financial and business account linked to my name. I changed passwords, updated my cybersecurity plan, and informed my insurer that there might be a data breach attempt. The next morning, my lawyer sent out a formal cease and desist notice to multiple recipients, written generally enough not to name anyone but clear enough to make the point. The letter warned against the unauthorized possession or sharing of private financial data. It didn't take long for it to reach her. Within 2 days, my aunt called, furious that I'd threatened Tessa. I told her calmly that personal information should never be used as gossip, then ended the call. I learned that silence worked better than arguments every time. 3 days later, Tessa made her biggest mistake yet. On her public freelance consulting page, she commented under a client post about the importance of honesty in business, adding a line that read, "Some people build entire careers hiding debts and calling it success." She didn't name me, but she didn't need to. I took a screenshot immediately. Within an hour, my lawyer had it, along with her previous anonymous message. I also sent copies to 2 of her former employers, who had contacted me months earlier to confirm details of her past conduct. I didn't post anything publicly, didn't react online. Everything went into documented files. A week later, Maria called to tell me what happened next. 2 of Tessa's freelance clients had terminated their contracts with her after verifying the post. They didn't want their brand associated with anyone hinting at personal attacks online. One of them even mentioned that they'd found her name connected to the committee suspension through archived articles. From that point on, her pattern was undeniable. Every time she tried to undermine someone, she exposed herself instead. She'd post something suggestive, people would investigate, and another piece of her past would come to light. It wasn't rumor anymore. It was documented behavior visible to anyone who cared to look. Family gatherings started to get awkward for her after that. A few relatives quietly admitted that they didn't want to invite her to events anymore because things always turned messy. Even my aunt stopped defending her as loudly as before. The energy that had once drawn people in now repelled them. By the end of the month, Tessa's page went quiet. No new posts, no interactions, nothing public. Her consulting site still existed, but had been stripped of contact information. It was just a name and a faded profile photo. I didn't need updates to know she was scrambling. For the first time, her downfall wasn't whispered behind closed doors. It was out there, documented by her own hand. But even then, I could tell she hadn't accepted the reality of it. Tessa had always believed she could rewrite any story, no matter how much evidence stood against her. The only difference now was that the audience had stopped believing her. By the time summer rolled around, Tessa's online presence was nearly gone. Her consulting page still existed, but it had turned into an empty shell. No clients, no updates, no contact form. Everyone who had once defended her now avoided mentioning her altogether. It might have ended there if she hadn't tried to use my name one last time. A client of mine hosted a regional networking event in late June, and my firm was listed as one of the sponsors. The event drew local business owners, representatives, and media figures. When I arrived, the organizer pulled me aside, holding a registration form. Someone had tried to check in using my company's name and credentials. The name on the badge was Tessa Carter. She'd even listed herself as a guest consultant for Claire Marketing Solutions. Security located her near the entrance during open registration. She wore a blazer identical to mine and tried to act like she belonged, taking advantage of the event's name-only check-in process. The organizer handled it discreetly, escorted her outside without a scene, but by then several people had noticed. The next day, the event coordinator sent an official incident report documenting the impersonation attempt. I added it to my legal folder. Later that week, I received an email from a local PR agency. They'd been contacted by Tessa a month earlier, pitching herself as a subcontractor for shared clients between our firms. When they ran a background check, the first thing that appeared was the committee's suspension statement and her deleted business pages. They forwarded me her email for verification, and the subject line read, "Rebranding and rebuilding with family partnership." It was another attempt to use my name for credibility. I replied professionally, confirming that we had no connection and included the event report for clarity. That closed that door for good. My aunt tried to reach me again after that. She left several voicemails saying Tessa had been going through a hard time and needed help rebuilding. I didn't respond. A few days later, my mother forwarded me a message from a family group chat. Tessa had posted a long note, claiming she was taking time away to focus on healing and asking everyone to forgive the past. The same day, one of my contacts sent me a screenshot from a freelance forum. Tessa had launched yet another venture, this time under a slightly altered version of her name, TC Consulting, offering reputation management services. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Her profile listed glowing, self-written testimonials and a promise to help professionals rebuild after defamation. But she made a mistake in her promotional materials. She used a stock photo of a client meeting that featured a visible company logo, one belonging to a firm I actually worked with. I forwarded the screenshot to the firm's owner. Within hours, the listing was taken down. Soon after, I learned that she'd applied for an official certification through a regional business association to make her new company look legitimate. The board required a background check and review of public conduct. I submitted the same documentation that had led to her previous suspension. Nothing personal, only verified public records. The board reviewed the materials, verified their authenticity, and denied her certification. The reason posted publicly on their site read, "Application rejected due to ethical inconsistencies and prior professional misconduct." That notice was the final blow. It appeared under her name in a searchable database used by clients and contractors. Within a week, the last remnants of her business accounts vanished. Even her alternate profile disappeared from freelance platforms. My aunt hosted a family reconciliation dinner a month later. She invited everyone, emphasizing that it was time to move forward. I politely declined. My mother attended and later told me that Tessa had shown up briefly, stayed quiet, and left early after realizing no one was taking her side. It wasn't revenge or punishment, it was simple consequence. Meanwhile, my own work reached new levels of success. The same magazine that once featured Tessa's charity campaigns published an article about ethical marketing leadership, naming my firm as a model for transparency. Several clients mentioned that they'd chosen me because they'd heard how gracefully I handled family challenges. I didn't correct them. The truth was all there for anyone willing to look. By fall, word reached me that Tessa was preparing to move out of state. A mutual acquaintance said she'd sold most of her belongings and was talking about starting fresh somewhere people don't hold grudges. Her last trace online was a brief farewell post thanking her supporters and promising to rise again. It didn't go viral. It didn't even get comments. Then her account went private. I didn't react. I didn't send a message or look for updates. For the first time, her story no longer touched mine. Her pattern had finally collapsed under its own weight, and there was nothing left for me to protect. Family gatherings became simple again. No whispered questions, no explanations. My mother stopped worrying about appearances, and my aunt eventually stopped bringing up Tessa altogether. The silence around her name became permanent. One evening, as I left my office, I passed the coffee shop where we used to meet for professional advice years ago. The owner told me she'd heard Tessa's apartment had been rented out and that her old mailbox had stacks of unopened letters still inside. It sounded like an ending, not dramatic, just final. Looking back, there wasn't a single moment that ended things between us. It happened slowly, through consequences, not conflict. She lost her reputation trying to rebuild it on lies, and I regained mine by staying quiet and factual. There were no apologies, no dramatic confrontations, no closure speech, just distance. And for the first time in years, it was enough. A full year passed without a single mention of Tessa. Her name didn't come up at family dinners. Her social media accounts stayed silent, and my aunt quietly stopped bringing her into conversations. My firm had grown steadily during that time. New contracts, new offices, and a growing list of trusted clients. The quiet felt different now. It wasn't the pause before another problem, it was stability that had finally earned its place. Then one Monday morning, my assistant flagged a consultation request from a potential client named T. Monroe. The inquiry looked routine, mid-sized business, standard project proposal, reasonable budget. But the phone number caught my attention. I knew it immediately. It was Tessa's. She was trying again, this time under her middle name. I didn't respond personally. I told my assistant to decline the consultation, marking the file as a permanent conflict of interest. The message was polite and professional, with no reference to her past. There would be no direct contact, no second chances, no opportunity for her to turn a simple email into another public performance. Later that week, I met with my lawyer to review my firm's contracts. Together, we added a clause that barred services for anyone with prior professional disputes or reputational conflicts. It was a clean, preventive measure, nothing emotional, just policy. I wasn't building walls for her. I was building structure for my business. A few weeks after that, one of my colleagues forwarded me an email that had circulated through a small marketing forum. The sender was Tessa, now presenting herself as a brand rehabilitation consultant. Her message included subtle digs about people in the industry who hold on to old grudges and those afraid of second chances. It wasn't difficult to recognize the target. I didn't respond. I didn't correct her or try to stop the whispers. The people who mattered already knew the truth, and those who didn't weren't worth convincing. The industry had seen her pattern too many times to mistake it for coincidence. By spring, my aunt decided to move to another city, close to where Tessa had relocated. She said it was for a quieter life, but everyone knew it was to stay near her daughter. Their absence at family events made things calmer. There were no more passive comments or tense pauses during gatherings, just normal conversation. It felt like breathing clean air after years of smoke. Months later, Maria sent me a short message. Tessa had found work at a small agency under her alias. Within a few weeks, she was dismissed again after the company discovered inconsistencies in her resume. They'd verified her references and found 2 of them fabricated. This time, no one tried to defend her. The story ended before it even began. Around the same time, my firm was featured in a regional business magazine. The article focused on ethical leadership and community engagement, listing my company as a model for transparent practices. It was quiet, satisfying proof that integrity lasted longer than noise. The article circulated locally, gaining traction online. A few days after its release, my aunt called. Her tone had softened. No accusations, no excuses. She admitted she hadn't realized how manipulative Tessa's behavior had been, and said she now understood why things unfolded the way they did. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was the first genuine acknowledgement of the truth. I thanked her, shifted the conversation to lighter topics, and ended the call on neutral terms. There was nothing left to revisit. Summer came and went without incident. Then, one rainy afternoon, I stopped at a bookstore near my office. As I walked toward the checkout counter, I saw her. Tessa stood a few steps ahead, holding a book and a small umbrella. Her hair was shorter, her clothes more subdued. She glanced at me and froze for a second. Then she nodded once. Small, cautious, almost tired. I nodded back. No words, no confrontation, just a quiet exchange that carried more weight than anything she could have said. She paid for her purchase and left. I watched her walk out into the drizzle, head down, blending into the street traffic. That was the last time I saw her. As I left the store, I realized that no confrontation, no apology, could have provided more closure than that brief moment of acknowledgement. She wasn't the villain in my life story anymore, just a reminder of what happens when someone mistakes manipulation for control. Over the next few months, my firm expanded again. I hired new staff, took on bigger projects, and partnered with charities for mentorship programs. Every success carried a trace of the lessons she'd unwillingly taught me: how to build boundaries, how to document everything, and how to keep moving without seeking validation. In the end, there was no dramatic conclusion, no public reckoning, no final argument, just quiet distance that stayed permanent. She continued to move from place to place, always chasing a reputation that could never be repaired. I continued to build a life where hers no longer intersected mine. The truth had done its work a long time ago. All that remained was perspective. I hadn't won by exposing her or proving anything. I'd won by refusing to keep playing her game. Everything I built after that, my career, my peace, my stability, stood on the boundaries she forced me to create. And that, more than anything, was the real ending. The story closed, not with revenge or victory, but with silence that finally meant freedom.